Paula Modersohn Becker is actually going to be the main focus. I was thinking that I was going to spread it out a little bit more over a couple of the other expressionist women, but as I got into studying her, she's a very unique voice and somebody that I think we can spend a little bit more time with. Um, let's so um, she was born in 1876 and died young, 31 years old, at in 1907. She was born in Dresden, and her family was kind of a well, they were upper middle class. Basically, her father was an engineer, um, operations inspector for the railroad, and her mother was actually Matilda was a aristocratic family. She had a much um, a very cultivated background. So that was something that Paula grew up with. She was the third of seven children, so she had brothers and sisters, um, some of whom she remained close to. Um, so really, what I want to talk about to begin with is Paula Becker synthesized the kind of modernist movement. Um, she, let's see, major figure in the history of German Expressionism, despite her importance to art history, Modersohn Becker's work has never before been the subject of a museum retrospective in the United States. And what you see here is one of the among 30 self-portraits that she did throughout her career. She, as I said, she died young. Her output, though, was quite prodigious. She produced over 700 paintings, and literally, I think I heard something along the lines of 1,400 drawings. Um, and she really kind of synthesized Cézanne, Gauguin, and Van Gogh after a rigorous classical academic training that she really had to pursue. Um, you know, women were not allowed into the academy in Germany at that time. So, in order to really get a good education, they had to get her tutors. She also um, studied at 16. She went to London. Her father's sister married a wealthy um, titled uh, British, I guess he was a duke or something like that. Um, so Paula went to London to, basically they were hoping to get her a little bit more polish and get her a little more practice at English. So she went, did not get along with her aunt. Um, and the her husband saw that but knew that she was really interested in art, so he enrolled her in in a school that was actually the preparatory school for the Royal Academy. So she was there at 16 among much older students. And she wrote that she felt that this would really sharpen her wits. Um, so one of the things that I want to say about her work is um, unlike her male counterparts in the expressionist movement, these pieces are much more tender and searching. There's a vulnerability, there's a strength that is one of inquiry. Um, her views of women are very different from the male gaze. The even her contemporary women artists were um, engaging in much more expressionistic, kind of violent imagery. If you think about uh, well, basically, um, I'll move along and talk more about this as we go along. But Katkowitz, her work was all about grief. It was about connections between women and children, and much more socially conscious, where Becker's work is focused on discovering identity. Um, and unlike Munderson Becker, Kolowitz gained great notoriety in her lifetime. Munderson Becker would probably have lapsed into obscurity had it not been for the fact that she was a really wonderful writer. And her letters were collected posthumously and published, and it became a bestseller in Germany, and actually throughout the world. It was actually translated into other languages. That began a pursuit. Collectors became interested in her work, and really um, that that raised her level of notoriety. So, as I said, she was academically trained. When she came back to Germany after being in London, um, she made a deal with her father that she could basically she would go to um, a teacher school to gain a trade so that she wouldn't be dependent. He felt that she was not so beautiful that she was going to find a good husband, so he wanted to make sure that she was secure. Well, that didn't exactly turn out to be the case, um but the deal was that she could go on and take her drawing classes, um, as long as she completed her course of study, which she did. Um, she found her way to a group of painters who had created a kind of artist retreat, um, and that basically that was where she met her husband to be. Um, okay, here is a self-portrait from 1897. She was studying in Berlin at that point, um, and mostly focusing on portraiture. This is a gouache opaque watercolor, and you see the photograph of her and her interpretation. So she did well over 30 self-portraits in her lifetime. So basically, um, there was a artist group that gathered together at Warp, Sweden, which is kind of near Dresden. And they were mainly landscape painters. And uh, Otto Munderson was one of the teachers there. Um, so basically, when Paul went there, she went to study with a teacher that did figurative work, which she was most interested in. And these were done in his class. He had his students draw life size. So these are large scale drawings, some of them, 6 feet tall. Uh, okay. And as I said, she was focused in 1898, 1899 on portraiture. She took classes with different teachers who approached it from very different points of view. Um, some extremely realistic, but it was all feeding her. It was all something that she learned from. Um, 4 afternoons a week were devoted to drawing. Uh, and so you see these large scale pieces. As I said, that male nude on the right is 72 by 30 inches, and the female nude is 66 by 32. Uh, and you can, the male nude is very academic. The female nude is much more moody and expressive in a way. Um, and the the little shot on the right is actually in the exhibit at the Neue Gallery. And as I said, most of the painters that were in this artist colony were landscape painters. So, she took a shot at it. I don't think she was that interested in it. So these only developed a bit when figures were involved in them. Um, so in 1900, actually, right at the stroke of the new year, she went to Paris for the first time. And in Paris, she saw, she studied, she took classes at the academy, where they actually allowed her to draw from, not from the academy, but from a salon where they actually allowed female students to draw from the nude model. Um, so that was something that she was really wanting to do, and that it really gave her a lot of opportunity. While she was there, she was exposed to contemporary French art. And so this is where she was exposed to Cezanne for the first time. She was took a studio in Montparnasse and went to um, uh, Voulard's gallery. Voulard was a major gallerist at the time, and when you went into his gallery, most of the artwork was turned to the wall. He had stacks and stacks of paintings, but he didn't have them displayed. He was kind of an intimidating character, kind of dark and brooding, as Gertrude Stein put it, intimidating. Um, but if he took to you, he'd allow you to kind of look through the racks and come up with things. So this Cézanne that you see at the top was a very different approach to landscape than Otto Munderson's beautiful but tonalist approach. And these are, they're nice paintings, they're bucolic and all that, but it's not breaking any new ground. Where the light, the energy, the composition, the notions about abstraction and representation that were being demonstrated in Cézanne were a real inspiration. And in fact, she also, at that point, I mean, this is 1900, so he had a lot of Cézanne's work turned to the walls there. And I'm sure that she saw some of his bathers, which probably inspired her when she went back. Um, and although she didn't have a lot of money, was not able to really pay for a lot of models, the peasants that lived in the area, um, especially the young children and older people, were willing to sit. Um, and these boys by the river are basically, this piece is I don't know if this is actually in the show. It's in the Worcester Museum of Art. Um, and here you have, you know, an old blind woman. This is a pastel from 1899 before she went to Paris. And then the two girls and Birch Trunk is in 1902 after she returned. Now, one of the things that happened in all of this is um, in her study, she met a young sculptor named Clara Westhoff, and Clara Westhoff and Paula became really close friends. And in fact, when she went in 1900 to Paris, Clara went with her to study with Rodin. And at Rodin's workshop, she met Rainer Maria Rilke, and they struck up a relationship and married in 1901. If you're not familiar with Rilke's work, Rilke is one of the great German poets and one of my favorite poets. Um, and he wrote a wonderful book called Letters to a Young Poet, which is really about opening up to creativity on whatever level. It's great for whatever art you're seeking to explore. So they were friends and gave Paula entree into a lot of artistic realms. She met Rodin, she saw Rodin's drawings, was absolutely fascinated by his drawings. And so Clara and Paula were fast friends, and they corresponded back and forth, and she also did the same with Rilke. So you can see where her letters would be really fairly interesting to read. Okay, of course, while in Paris, she also saw the still lifes by Cézanne. And so these really affected her. Um, and here you see in 1900, actually, this still life on the left was painted after she went back to Wharf, Sweden, but she missed Paris so much. And you see the fleur de lis in the background. But the foreshortening and games that she's playing with this tabletop was something that she began to integrate from what she saw in Cézanne. And the still life on the right is from 1905. So that's 1900 to 1905. In her career, that's a long span. And this wonderful fried eggs in a pan is really, showing that kind of use of distortion and kind of um, pulling you into the still life. Her paint application is another thing to watch. I mean, the sensuality of her paint is really remarkable. Let's see if I can do a little zoom in on this so that we can see the texture, the application. So she also met Bonnard, met Vouillard, and these guys were really into this kind of intimate um, uh, entry into the composition. Okay, again, putting this up next to the Gauguin. And again, Gauguin is one that she would have seen in Vouillard's gallery. Um, and the color and the form and all of that really impressed her. Of course, basically, the other thing I wanted to say is this painting back here by Cézanne was owned by Gauguin. In fact, it was one of his treasures, and he had to sell it later on when he was having some trouble, um, you know, keeping himself going when he had taken off for Tahiti. But this piece really shows his indebtedness and his love of Cézanne's approach and the way of moving the eye around the composition, the paint application, and color and the link. So you can begin to see how this is integrated into Paula's work. Um, I have to say, her husband did not quite appreciate the modernist track that she was taking, um, although he really supported her and actually helped her survive at certain points when she was in Paris. Um, he didn't quite get the simplification and lumpiness of these pieces. But there is something so tender in this beautiful painting, Girl with Child. It's naive, but very sophisticated in feel. Okay. And here is a portrait that she did of Clara Rilke Westhoff. And on the right is a portrait of Rainer Maria Rilke. One of the things that I wanted to do here is, basically this is it's within a relatively close period of time. Um, uh, but you can see the difference in the approach to these paintings. And in fact, I believe it was 1903, there was a major retrospective of Gauguin's work, and I think that she was still integrating those broad planes. The other thing that she was looking at were these Roman period Egyptian sarcophagus paintings and the broad planes and riveting eyes in these pieces. Again, I'm gonna do a zoom in so that we can see a little bit closer these guys, and you can see the that visionary gaze, and see the paint application here, how rigorous that background is, and then this buildup of texture on Clara's face. Now, Clara was a sculptor, so there's something inherent in the approach to this that has to do with that feel of stone, of pumice. Uh, they remained supportive, although Paula never felt quite as close to Clara. Clara had a baby. The bonds were different. So here we are back and forth. Now, notice the self-portrait on the right here, and look back at these Roman Egyptian paintings, and you can see that those broad planes being brought in. Her her subject matter, her approach to children, entering into that world, is something that, these are not grand history paintings. These are not um, aristocratic children. These are peasants. These are young girls that she could get to sit for her, but she endows them with a kind of stillness and nobility. Now you can see in this old peasant woman, some of the although she never met Kathy Kalwitz. They actually both studied at the same school, but at different times. And in fact, Kathy Kalwitz came back and taught a year or two after Paula left the school in Berlin. Um, but you can see a kinship to um, the peasant stock, the earthy um, uh, subject matter that she was drawn to. And this beautiful little piece on the right, children in the sun, that cast shadow over that face. Again, I gotta indulge myself and get in here and look at this thing a little bit closer, because if you notice that hair on the child, and you see those scrape marks in there, she actually used the back of her brush, the handle of her brush, to scratch into that surface to create the texture of that hair. She was always experimenting. Okay, so when Clara married Otto, Otto had been married, and his wife died at 31, bearing him a child. the child was 3 years old when Otto married Paula in 1901. Um, and Paula cared for Elspeth, you know, though she did not want to be tied down and suffocated by uh, being pinned into a home life where she could not get off to Paris when she needed to. But down on the lower right, you see a portrait that Paula painted of Elspeth out in the landscape. So this is when the landscape got more interesting to her. When there's a figure in it, then it made those shapes more interesting to her. Uh, and these are pictures. Let's see. The photograph in the lower right-hand corner of the photo array is again Clara with Paula. And oh, you see the picture on the upper left. That is Paula with Otto, and you see that he's got the black armband on his arm. This is, basically he was still in mourning for the loss of his first wife. Um, Below on the lower left, you see Paula with her newborn child. She did not last long after. Um, Basically, what happened was she was it was a rough childbirth. She was advised to stay in bed for 3 or 4 weeks, which we know now is a big mistake. When she got up after a couple of weeks, she had an embolism and died. Uh, Her last words were, "What a waste." Okay. On that cheerful note, we'll move on to the joy of her life, which was paintings, wonderful paintings. This wonderful little painting of the scroll with rabbit. I believe that's actually Elsbeth holding the rabbit. Though I could be wrong, and it doesn't really matter. It's just a wonderful image. And then the child holding a cat. She's got several of these. There's a half a dozen of them with children holding cats. But it's just a wonderful little intimate shot. You get, this kind of cropped image of just the arm around around this cat with the arm sticking straight out. And then again, here's a beautiful, tender self-portrait with charcoal and pastel. Uh, Again, if you guys have any questions about any of this, put it in the chat. And if it's relevant to where I am, Joan will pass it on to me. So questions are more than welcome. Okay. And now we're going to move on to the major theme that I'm going to hit on hard, which is basically motherhood. And Paula would explore this to a great degree. There were dozens more of these images of women with children, but this business of breastfeeding and all that, aside from someone like Mary Cassatt, you do not see a lot of artists addressing motherhood in this way. You don't see a lot of breastfeeding, especially not even in Mary Cassatt. It was much more discreet. And below you see Paula with Elspeth. So you can see that they did have sort of a relationship there. Moving on to this, in 1906, she painted this mother kneeling with child. Now, this is entering into Cubism. I mean, really before Picasso and and Durand and somebody, you know, like Brock were were doing these kind of architectonic figures. She was really picking this up from Cézanne and carrying it forward. Now you see this child, this beautiful, beautiful piece on the right of this very subtly painted, very beautiful um, tonalist treatment of the child in the crib, the sleeping child, and this much more um, bold kneeling woman. And these are within a couple of years of each other. Uh, I'm not saying that it's either or, because she would rock back and forth between the more naturalistic rendering to the more cubist structural work. But this reclining mother, the volume, the beautiful quality to it, it is really different from the kind of sexualizing that the male artists would put on a female nude. This is much more about nurturing. It's much more about a envelopment. Um, and here is Gauguin, Nevermore. I mean, and you see what I mean. This is a much more sexualized. He had um, three or four 15-year-old wives staggered throughout his time in Tahiti. Um, and there's a decadence, kind of slightly unhealthy pallor about this painting. You know, these figures outside the window kind of gossiping something not too complimentary, I'm sure. Um, but when you look at this and you go to this, now you can see the broad plains, the sense of volume, that that fullness and stability that is in this Gauguin, that Paula would have picked up on. And again, this is a Paula Munderson Becker. This is in Paris. You see the fleur de lis in the background, give you a little bit more message. And again, this is back to kind of that alabaster stone, you know, a sculpted painting. And it's late, you know, this is um at one point she just couldn't take it any longer and ran off to just packed up her clothes and in the night took off from Otto, um, headed to Paris. And they continued to write back and forth, but there came points where she just needed to escape. In this period, she painted these fabulous paintings. You know, this is a self-portrait, a nude self-portrait, which was really unknown. I mean, there may have been other people, other women artists who painted so, nude self-portraits, but I don't know of them, and there aren't a lot of records of them at this time. Um, she did take photographs and use those photographs for references when she was painting. Um, and again, the piece on the left, this business of the ripeness, holding this fruit, you know, this kind of bountifulness. Um, in the self-portrait, she's holding the two flowers, one, you know, of her creativity and one of the blossoming of her womanhood. There's that sort of notion going on here. She, when she was in again, I'm gonna I'm going to harken back for a moment to when she was studying in London. She studied under Rossetti, who was part of the Pre-Raphaelite school, which are very much into this symbolist business. And so at 16 years old, she was exposed to these notions about having kind of a ritual, symbolic meaning to the objects in your paintings. And this flowering thing was always something which recurred throughout her work. And here is self-portrait at sixth wedding anniversary. This was painted in 1906. She was in Paris. She was away from Otto. She was not pregnant. She painted herself as pregnant. Part of part of her thinking was, along with her creativity, bringing a child into the world was something that she really did want to do. And Otto and Paula reconciled within the year, and she went back to Germany. But this is a very interesting painting. She was not pregnant, painted herself as pregnant. Something like this you might see in a Alice Neal painting now, but back in 1906, not a whole lot. This is before women's suffrage had taken effect fully. Women hadn't had the right to vote, for crying out loud. And this woman is putting herself out there. It's quite a remarkable, courageous piece. And here we go. A full nude, full bodied nude. And here is a photograph of herself and these pieces that she did from from that photograph, really. The one in the center is much smaller. The one on the left is really a full size, full uh length painting. She For the most part, her work was on a modest scale. It really, her interest was in this business of intimacy, and being close to the painting to take it in is part of that. Again, mother and child, um, and th- this again, with the kneeling and standing girls. Um, this is a really interesting piece. Reminds me so much of Gauguin. That kind of Polynesian fantasy. These are really interesting pieces. They were painted, 1906, 1907. And again, you know, Gauguin with the mango. Uh, so these pieces are, 1906, 1907. This is really echoing things to come. Um, in the full-blown German expressionists, somebody like Emil Nolde would go for kind of primitive idols and kind of obscure references to the South Seas and all that. Um, these paintings are really interesting, awkward, fascinating. I I just, the loss of Becker at 31 is something that I would have really loved to have seen what blossomed out of these really wonderful paintings. And here again is an indebtedness that there was a Van Gogh show in 1905 that she saw. And, you can see that kind of psychological intensity that Van Gogh put into his paintings, and that kind of this this sort of depth in Munderson Becker's work. Again, notice that there's a little sprig of flowers in her lap. And these are a couple of really late paintings. One of Otto sleeping, you know, big forms, big shapes, beautiful rhythmic lines, the way she's got the composition set up on the this canvas is very beautifully painted. I mean, there's a lot of paint on it too. I'm not going to do a zoom in because it'll pixelate, I can tell. Um, and these are two of Rilke's friends who Paula knew, who who she painted. This is a fairly small gouache, opaque watercolor. She also was very influential on some other people. Picasso struggled with this portrait of Gertrude Stein. She went through 50 sittings or more. I can't even remember the amount of sittings, but you can see the X-ray image over here. I'm going to close in on it so you can see it. Actually, zoom in, and you can see how he's moving this head around. He couldn't figure out what to do with this, and he saw Paula's painting. They were all in Montparnasse together. They went to each other's studios. He saw this painting, and I'm gonna say he stole some stuff from Paula in this case. But that's just my take on it. And again, the goldfish bowl. Uh, this is in it painted in 1906. Beautiful little still life. There's this whole bouncy business with that that horizon line behind the still life coming in different spots, an old Cezannean trick to keep the eye moving around and shift the planes around. I can't say for sure that Matisse saw this painting, but there's an affinity there. Okay, and now I'm going to move on just to give a nod to Kalowitz. And you know, Paul was not the only one painting mothers and children, but a very different approach. The grief and loss aspect, the sense of social responsibility in Kathy Kalowitz is so strong. I mean, she was brought up by socialist parents, so that was cut her teeth on that. And here are two more. This is Gabrielle Munter on the left. Gabrielle Munter was involved with Kandinsky. They lived together for a lot of years. He was very supportive of her, but he was also married, and it was I guess it was Catholic stuff. They couldn't get divorced. But Gabrielle Munter's work is not on view, whereas Kathy Kalowitz and Paula Modersohn Becker are. On the right is Marion Werfelskin. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that again. But look at the green pallor on these characters. She's again a very, very interesting, expressionist painter. And there was a show of the four of them at the Royal Academy. I'll give you the YouTube information at the end here. And we're going to close out with more two more self-portraits, late self-portraits. And in fact, the self-portrait on the right is her last self-portrait. She is pregnant in this, and she's holding up the two flowers, the flower of her creativity and the flower of her womb. Brilliant painter. Um, who knows what she would have been capable of. But what she left us with was something fabulous. And these still lives, which are many of them are in one of the late rooms in the show, are well worth a visit to this exhibition all by themselves. They're just so wonderful, so playful, and the color is just magnificent. So there's a YouTube on Munderson Becker's Three Boys in the Bathtub. I mean, Bathing in the Canal. That was done by her biographer, Diane. I'm not going to try and pronounce her name either. But if you go to YouTube and go to this master series, Paula Munderson Becker's Three Boys Bathing in a Canal, she does a really wonderful hour-long lecture. And the other one is Making Modernism from the Royal Academy. And that is another one. The first 40 minutes are devoted to Paula Munderson Becker. And so with that, I will leave you for 2 weeks and we'll see you. Hopefully you can come to the concert tomorrow. Okay.
See you then. I just want to
Yep.
thank you, Larry. Meanwhile, for such a young woman, unbelievable amount of work.
Unbelievable amount of work.
I couldn't get over you. You kept going and going.
I just scratched the surface.
Unreal.